This happened to me a few years ago. I'm a female in my 30s and due to working commitments I was moving house. At this point I lived in Glasgow, Scotland, but was being relocated to Hampshire in England. I had known about the move for around 6 months and so had everything prepared and was ready to go. The company I was working for had a small estate for employees and their family, and so accommodation was also ready. Around a week before moving I started dreaming about it. This was not too unusual for me as I always dreamt about big things in my life a few days before they happened. Things like new jobs, house moves, etc. The first dream was very vague. I woke up at around 3 AM and all I could remember was a house. Just like in most dreams, I could not recall too many specific details. I looked up at the clock and went back to sleep. The next day I was sorting out the last few bits that needed packing and I went to bed around 9 PM. I dreamt about the new house again, except this time in a bit more detail. I remember walking out of the house in the middle of the night. I made my way up an unknown road and could hear a dog barking. I usually sleep quite heavily, but on this occasion woke up easily. Again, I didn't think anything of it. I rolled back over and went to sleep. The next day was moving day. Well, for most of my things anyway. I was due to follow up, or down as this is the case, tomorrow. 2 men arrived with a large van and proceeded to pack my boxes and belongings into the van. It took a lot longer than I thought and they left around 9:30 PM. I went straight to bed afterwards. That night, I had the weirdest dream I'd had so far. I was walking up the same unknown road and saw a large building. There was a dog tied up, barking outside. I was in a deep sleep at this point after the tiring day I'd had, but looking back now, it felt as though I was entirely conscious. I had a huge urge to walk into the building, as I did notice it was eerily quiet. It looked like some kind of hospital with trolleys laying the corridors and offices with notice boards. It looked pretty derelict. Straight opposite, when you walk in, was the main stairway. It was a large building and when I looked up the middle of the stairs, there looked to be around 6 floors. This was obviously a dream, so it's hard to recall the full details, but before I knew it, I was walking down a corridor on the top floor. I could see the hills out of the window. It was weird. Before I knew it, it had changed from day to night. The whole place was dark, other than an ominous orange glow. There was a fire. In my dream it had consumed the floor. I made my way over to the window and hastily opened it. I could hear the dog barking below. Before I knew it, I was being burned and made the decision in my mind to jump, even though it meant certain death. I jumped, and as I fell to the floor, I woke up in sweat. It was 3 AM. This was one of those intense dreams that stuck with me, the kind where you feel the emotions throughout the day. It was moving day and I packed the last bits of pieces in my car before setting off. I listened to the radio and just tried to forget the dream. In my mind, I had just wrote it off as one of my unusual big changes dreams with a darker twist. I arrived at my new home around 6 PM. A few colleagues of mine were also being relocated and so we arranged to meet at a local restaurant. When we were there, I told my colleagues about my dream and one of them laughed. When I asked why they were laughing, he said something along the lines of, "Ha, you can't get me with that. My parents live not too far from the estate." I had no idea what he was talking about and so I questioned him further. It turns out our company had purchased an old hospital site which they developed as a housing estate. Even weirder still, the hospital had been derelict for around 5 years when a mentally ill woman set it on fire and died in the process. Her family had been a bit of a local laughingstock as they all believed she was possessed by the devil. Apparently, she was a diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic patient. She set the hospital on fire and was stuck inside. She left her dog outside and jumped to her death after being consumed by smoke. Honestly, this has affected me to this day. I tried to write it off as I may have seen this somewhere and subconsciously dreamt about it. I'm certain that's not the case, and when I think about it, and the detail in my dreams, it gives me the creeps. I stayed with a friend that evening and drove back to Glasgow the following day. I told the company I could not relocate and they were good enough to find me a position back in Glasgow. I stayed with my parents until I got back on my feet, but I could not bring myself to go back to Hampshire. My name is Jesse, and just to be clear, I'm a boy. 16 now, but when this happened, I don't think I was much older than 12. At the time, my parents were still together and it was late in the summer. My sister also hadn't yet moved to university, and with our house only having 2, albeit large rooms, we had to share. It was awful, but I'm not going to get too much into that right now. So, as I say, it was late summer, and one particular night at around 11 PM, me and my family were watching a film, the much-loved classic, Cleopatra. Now, if you've not seen it, it's nearly 4 hours long. It got to around 2 AM and me and my sister just couldn't go through it and decided to turn in. We did the regular bedtime routine, brushed our teeth, set alarms, etc., and flicked the light off for sleep. Mum and Dad stayed downstairs watching the film and kept the volume moderate, but low. I struggled to sleep properly in the heat, and living in Scotland it's not something we're used to. Think a slightly warmer north side of the wall. So, the film was nearly over. It must have been, and I was half asleep, half awake, when the lamp, no more than half a foot from my head, just flicked on. I even heard the switch flick, even though it was at the side of my bed. Before I could turn it off, however, the bulb began making a high-pitched whirring sound, like a whistle almost, slowly becoming more intense. I looked to the other side of my room at my sister. She was sound asleep. I thought the bulb was going to explode and flicked it off fast and made a mental note to change it in the morning, just in case. The darkness and the peace were short-lived when the light soon flicked back on, with the distinct. I had my head buried under the pillows and at first I honestly thought I was just hearing things as I didn't register any lights in my soft bunker. Silence ensued and then the whirring began to pick up intensity again. I threw the pillow off my head and again flicked it off, rather angry at this point. I tossed and turned my back on the lamp, glancing at my sister who was still clearly asleep. I knew it wasn't her. I would have heard her walk over. I closed my eyes and at last fully drifted to sleep. I woke up to find my light on and a really loud and intense whir sound was coming from my lamp. I checked my phone. 4:23 AM. What the fuck? I don't tend to wake up easily. I mean, I'd consider myself a heavy sleeper. I thought this weird. Having said that, the bulb was really quite loud and I was surprised my sister hadn't woken. Needless to say, I was now pissed off and tired. Not a good combination, but one I often find goes hand in hand together way too much. I pulled the plug out of the socket and threw it to the ground. Darkness enveloped the room and, unlike most stories of this nature, I was glad and embraced it. I got comfy and closed my eyes. No more than 20 seconds had passed when the bulb began whirring. I opened my eyes, actually kind of scared, and to my relief, the light was not on, but the bulb was whirring. I was now more scared I was going to get a face full of glass shrapnel and, rather dangerously and haphazardly, without even properly looking, unscrewed the bulb and tucked it under my bed. It would be going light within the hour, so I knew I needed to fall asleep fast, and this obviously made it difficult for me to sleep. You know how it is. Sod's law. I was laying in complete silence when I heard the familiar. I opened one eye and heard the clicks come in rapid succession. I put my hand down the side of my bed and grabbed the switch. I didn't touch another person's hand or anything like that, but it was cold to the touch, where it almost felt wet. Like I say, it was late summer and had been really hot the last few days, so I was confused about this. I went back to sleep and kept my hand on the switch to stop clicking, when, after a short time, my hand was freezing. So cold, in fact, I had goosebumps. I pulled away from the switch and almost immediately, it began clicking again. I quickly grabbed it and, to my horror, I noticed it had physically been flicked. It was flicked to the other side. I had an empty feeling in my stomach and, with my thoughts running fast, I pushed the lamp off my bedside table to the floor. I was scared and there's no denying that, but I must have dozed off as I woke up to the sound of my alarm. I looked over at my sister. She was already out of bed and probably downstairs. I asked her and Mum and Dad, and they all said, rather seriously, that they hadn't messed around with my lamp. And when they asked why, I brushed it off. I did some of my own research into this and found that cold spots, as they are referred to, can be a sign of a spirit. As a youngster, this really scared me as I didn't know much about the paranormal and I didn't look much more into it, nor did I tell anyone as, during my research, I couldn't find anyone having such an intense one-off case as I did. I brushed it to the back of my mind for the last 4, maybe 5 years, until just last week I was laying in bed, just to clarify, with an entirely different lamp, when I heard a click and the light came on, followed by the familiar whirring. I just immediately put it on the floor and thought it was really creepy. Can anyone help? Anyone have any similar situations? Could it be my electrics? I mean, it's not the lamps, I'm sure of that, but then how do I explain the cold spots? Now it's happened a second time, I'm twice as scared and have twice as many questions.